Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Annette Bohr, an Associate Fellow with the Russia-Eurasia Program at Chatham House, and I'll be chairing today's discussion. And I'm truly pleased to introduce you to today's panel, not least because they are my dream team when it comes to discussing today's topic, which is the rather complex subject of Central Asia's relations with Russia and China. Central Asia is certainly one of the regions to have felt the ripple effects from Russia's war the most keenly. And the full-scale invasion continues to reshape and sometimes even upend the status quo there. And with each year, we've seen Central Asia move more and more into the spotlight, not least because the countries of the region are perfect partners for Russia in so many ways, ranging from Moscow's use of the region to try to reorient its own export routes following the implementation of sanctions, to simply demonstrating that Moscow is now, it's not isolated on the world scene. Um, and it's interesting to see how the Central Asian leaders have been on tour of late, like never before, and perhaps even a bit like rock stars on a road trip. Meeting with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, French President Emmanuel Macron, US President Joe Biden, and of course, I mustn't forget to mention UK Foreign Secretary David Cameron's recent whirlwind trip to all 5 states of the region. And then there's China. Following the coronavirus epidemic, Chinese leader Xi Jinping chose Kazakhstan as his first foreign destination in 2022. And in May of last year, the first China plus Central Asia summit, something that had not taken place before, did take place in the Chinese city of Xi'an, which was aimed at elevating regional relations with Beijing and really cementing ties. So to discuss all this and more, we've got 2 great speakers. Nargis Kasanova is a senior fellow and director of the program on Central Asia at Harvard University's Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies. We consider Nargis a real friend of the program and have been collaborating with her since at least 2019, when we published a report on Kazakhstan called Tested by Transition, for which she kindly wrote the chapter on Kazakhstan's relations with China and Russia. Timur Umarov is a fellow at the Carnegie Russia Eurasian Center in Berlin, where he focuses on Central Asia's foreign and domestic policies, as well as China's relations with Russia and Central Asia. And his truly trenchant analyses have helped us all to navigate, particularly me, developments in the region, particularly bearing in mind the never-ending twists and turns that Russia's war has brought. And I've really long wanted to have his input into our work. So a really warm welcome to our 2 speakers. The event is on the record, and please do enter your questions using the Q&A function throughout the talk. And after an initial discussion with the panelists, I'll certainly be turning to those questions. So I'll start with you, Timur. Many stereotypes abound regarding the triangular relationship between Russia, China, and the Central Asian states, and one of them focuses on the idea of agency, and specifically the idea that policies in Central Asia are enacted primarily at the behest of either Moscow or Beijing, rather than by the Central Asian leaderships as actors in their own right. Now, what sort of leverage, in your opinion, do Moscow and Beijing wield over the Central Asian states relative to the ability of the states themselves to formulate their own policies, including the development of relations with the EU, the US, Turkey, and other states?
First of all, thank you very much for having me. It's a great honor. Especially, it's an honor to be here together with you, Annette, and Nargis. I think the question of agency is the key question when we speak about the role of Central Asia in Eurasian affairs, or the place of the region in the global affairs. I do believe that we have this stereotype where we think that all of the decisions that are made, all of the main decisions that are made in Central Asia by Central Asian actors, or with regards to Central Asia, are actually not made in the capitals of Central Asian countries, but rather in Moscow or Beijing. And I think that this is not what is happening in reality. It's not just because it is a oversimplification of the situation, or that creating this kind of picture is somehow disrespectful towards Central Asian countries. No, I think that the problem with these point of view is that we come to wrong conclusions when we tend to think in these terminology. So first of all, why I think this is oversimplification. The Central Asian countries, logically, many portray these countries as very young political regimes that, inherited most of their structures and the way their political systems operate from the Soviet Union, and because of that, many people create already existing dependencies on Russia, which are, of course, in place. I myself have written a lot about the ties that Central Asian countries and especially Central Asian political elites have to Moscow and to Russia as a whole. However, saying that all of the decisions are automatically being made by Moscow is simply wrong. When we say that the Central Asian political regimes don't have any influence over what's happening in their countries, we we tend to forget that those regimes exist in the context and not in a sort of kind of a vacuum where only the geopolitical rivalry of Russia with other parts of the world exists. Russia simply is not, actively present in the region 24/7, even though there is a huge involvement of some parts of the Russian political elites in the region, and there are connections between Central Asian political elites with Russia. But all of the decisions that are being made, whether they look as pro-Russian or pro-Chinese, are being taken by the political elites in Central Asia because of their pragmatism. And we've seen multiple examples of that in the last decade, and especially in the last couple of years amidst the war in Ukraine. I will just give one example to prove my point. Many times when we hear about Central Asia's position on for example, the discriminative politics of Beijing in Xinjiang, many people portray these decision of Central Asian countries to support Beijing as a way to, many people portray the situation as China is putting pressure on Central Asian countries and threatening them to lower its economic presence in the region or stop inflow of investment. And that is why Central Asian countries are taking the decision that they're taking. However, in reality, I would say that when it comes to these kinds of questions, Central Asian political regimes put themselves in the shoes of Beijing, and they imagine if something would have happened to them, something that is similar to the pressure that Beijing is facing for its discriminative policies in Xinjiang, what would they want to do? And only after that, they make certain decisions. And it's not because they are afraid of, pressure from Beijing, or it's not because they are dictated by Beijing to vote in a certain way in the UN Assembly, but rather this is something that they themselves want to do because of their own, their own thinking about how domestic politics should work and how foreign countries should or should not involve into their domestic issues.
Okay, well, just a follow up here, if I may. You've underlined the importance of recognizing Central Asian agency, but when responding to Western overtures and multi-vectoring in general, we often see the Central Asian leaderships using this very agency to claim a diminished sense of agency, rather ironically, by pointing out that they're wedged between Russia and China, they're under pressure, and so really need Western help and investment to escape this tight grip. And Western leaders often just lap these statements up, perhaps in part owing to an inflated sense of Western agency, and in part owing to a genuine underestimation of the extraordinarily far reaching and complex ties between Russia and Central Asia. I mean, Lord Cameron even recently claimed that there's a chance for the UK to weaken Russia's grip in Central Asia, the UK, remarking that those leaderships regard Moscow's policies as destructive and reactionary. At the same time, we see how these same leaderships, and I'm distinguishing here between leaderships and societies, they're eagerly supporting Russia's and China's economic plans from which they are directly benefiting. So, what is going on here? How should we read this playing on all sides? And please feel free to jump in, Nargis. Or Timur.
In
After Timur,
yeah. Sorry, I would just quickly say that, in my opinion, there are, this is a pure pragmatism that Central Asian countries are using, especially right now when they are in the part of the world that is literally being surrounded by the set of countries that have worsening relationship with the West, and that is why they have different rhetoric for different partners. They say what will be more beneficial for them in the West, and they of course don't use these narratives when they visit Moscow or Beijing. I think this is a clear example of how pragmatic Central Asian countries are.
All right. Okay. No, Giz, would you like to?
Well, of course they have agency, and this agency draws on what's at their disposal, right? What capacity they have, how they see the context, and well, sensitivities. What Timur mentioned, they imagine themselves in the shoes of Beijing, and you need to understand the sensitivities of others, especially the bigger players. You need to understand what works, what doesn't. You can underscore your weaknesses, to get some benefits. And it's normal. I would say it's very normal, and given for the what kind of states Central Asian states are, smaller and maybe a little bit medium range nation states. But here I want to emphasize the word relationship. These are relationships that Central Asian states have with other states, with their neighbors, and with countries further away. And if we speak about relations with Russia and China, these are special relations, especially the ones with Russia, because after all, we emerged out of one country, the Soviet Union, and before that, we had been incorporated in the Russian Empire. And as you both mentioned, there are all these ties, a plethora of ties, and I would say psychological settings. Also quite, I think it's very, very important for Central Asia to interact with Russia, for Central Asians to interact with the Russians, psychologically. It's a different dynamic. If you want to assert yourself, first and foremost, you assert yourself vis-a-vis Russia and Russians, and hello decolonization, right? But it's also the most challenging thing to do. So it's pretty complicated, and we see it at the top level. Central Asian leaders, on the one hand, they they're very familiar with their Russian counterparts, which makes it easier to kind of you know to interact and do things. But at the same time, kind of there are these inbuilt hierarchies, and kind of there is this heritage, legacy, baggage, and which makes it more difficult than in relations with other states, with including China or Western states. And we probably all saw that May 9th picture with Central Asian leaders sitting, together with Putin at the parade, and and I think it's very it's a good illustration, because they had to be there. They needed to show up, to pay respect. But what were they thinking, and how happy they were sitting there, right? What was on their mind? So it's a complicated relationship, and of course, speaking of leverage, of course, Russia has leverage. Yeah, there are all these dependencies. We all five have kind of their sets of dependencies and vulnerabilities. But the thing about leverage is that it works best when you don't need to use it, right? It's more kind of preventive, because once you use your lever, right, the kind of that might scare away and kind of push the other side to look for alternatives, right? So so it is a game, and the kind of Central Asians, Russian policymakers, everybody's playing, David Cameron and all the others, right? So there is signaling, there is testing the ground, there are actions, retractions, resistance, hedging with the others, and there is understanding what kind of Russians would be annoyed with, and then it might be doable, right? But there is also understanding that's about certain things. Russians are super sensitive, and it's something where they would be kind of ready to use their leverage. And one example would be when Americans were withdrawing from Afghanistan, and there were all these kind of testing the ground if they can move some facilities to Central Asia. And there, I think Russia drew a red line, and very, very clear that they don't want any facilities. But on the other hand, like in Kazakhstan, I'm from Kazakhstan, there've been all this pressure on Kazakhstan to close to stop cooperation with the Americans on the biosafety lab, right? And kind of Kazakhstani government has resisted, right? And it has been maintaining the partnerships and all that. So certain things, kind of you try to push, right? That's where you kind of know that it's not a red line, So, but it's basically what I want to stress that it is a relationship, right? And the kind of you're working in this context, you're working with these particular counterparts, and you try to understand how it works, and you learn, you make mistakes sometimes, right? And that's something I think that Central Asians learned from the war. Yeah. That you need to be like, they've been very careful handling Russia, right? Maybe even, kind of sometimes maybe too sensitive, right? But, and kind of too much maintaining this power hierarchy, right, that we inherited from the Soviet times. But they've been always kind of handling the Russian factor very carefully.
Okay, well, I just want to shift the focus slightly here with another question, with the question to you, Nargis, actually, and this moving on to the actual Russia-China relationship. So, with regard to the cooperation dynamic between Russia and China within the region, has it been catalyzed by Russia's war on Ukraine? I mean, what are the significant weak spots within this cooperation in your view? And is the Sino-Russian bilateral relationship helpful or a hindrance to the Central Asian states as they seek to balance between the two powers? Are they able to use, China as a hedge, for example, in certain situations?
Well, I don't know if I would define it as like catalyzed, but definitely there is an impact of the war on these relations, right?
Mhm.
This triangle. Um, in a nutshell, I think what happened is that, well, the war, what Russia did, what Russia is doing, scared Central Asians. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, they are definitely less comfortable now with Russia as a regional power, and that sort of pushes them more into China's embrace. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, and well, China is now perceived as a more kind of is a more decent, more reliable, more predictable regional power. And you mentioned the ASEAN summit, and we also kind of saw this nice picture full of them, and kind of I think the picture had a lot of symbolism, right? And they were very happy to be there together with Xi, in contrast, I think, to what we saw on the 9th of May, right?
Yeah.
In Moscow. Um, so they leaned onto China, but at the same time, now Russia needs the region more, and it kind of wants to kind of hold it tighter, but it lacks sufficient resources, and it cannot afford to actively kind of block China's growing role and presence, because it put itself into such a position where it depends on China
Mhm.
so much. So it's this kind of mix of cooperation and competition that we had seen before, and now it's becoming even more interesting and complicated, right?
Yeah.
Um, and of course, they share some interest, and they cooperate on certain things. And of course, like SCO is an important format for that. They don't like US kind of hegemony, and they foster together the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, kind of all these things under its umbrella. And but at the same time, there is some quiet competition, because the interests diverge in certain areas. And here I would say competition in the triangle. Like now, Turkmenistan and Russia are competitors. They both want access to Chinese market for their gas. And if you take a look at the transport corridors, the middle corridor is in competition with the northern corridor that goes via Russia. And Kazakhstan is very much invested in the middle corridor, and Uzbekistan is also now invested in the middle corridor. So there is competitive dynamic there. But as Timur's boss, Alexander Gabuev very nicely kind of summarized, I think they're quite good now at managing their difficulties.
Yeah. So I definitely wanted to move on to the trade routes, but would both of you say basically then it's fair to say that although Russia's influence in Central Asia has been declining and China's has been rising since the onset of the war in Ukraine, this is not translated into increased strategic competition in the region, and that despite some collision of interest, perhaps there's no open rivalry between the two, especially as that would run against their common goals. I mean, would you say that that's a pretty fair statement?
Couple of things, because my mic is is on. Um,
Okay.
I think that it increased the competition, because definitely Russia doesn't like this growing
Okay.
kind of growing presence, influence of China in the region, because for Russia, it's it's their zone of privileged interest and whatever. So,
Mhm.
but they can't afford to contest that. Yeah. But the fact that they are not happy, I think, so basically, I don't think they will cooperate much in the region.
Mhm. Mhm.
They wouldn't be putting, like, what's the expression, like, drive, how do you call it, like in the wheel, like when you're putting something. So they will not be like blocking each other, but
Mhm.
there is a competition. And now one example is, I don't know if it's a good example, but the Kazakhstan, or the railway, the China, Kyrgyzstan, um, Uzbekistan
Uzbekistan.
railway, yeah, that Russia had been blocking
Mm.
until the war. Then it seems it gave the permission to Kyrgyzstan to pursue it, but now China is not particularly interested. So it's like different factors that
Yeah, yeah.
go into this.
But
Yeah.
what about you, Timur? Would you agree with Nargiz, or do you think there has been no increase in strategic competition between the two?
I think this is the question that me and Nargis were debating about a lot on maybe every single meeting that we have. But this is the beauty of expert community, that we all have different points of view, and we peacefully debate about it. My opinion is, I would say, the opposite. I think that Russia and China are cooperating in the region. I don't think that Russia will um, yeah, as Nargis rightly said, I don't think that Moscow is ready to act in any way to somehow become a real competitor rival in Central Asia for China, and that is why it's ready to cooperate. I think that for Russia, its own relationship with China matter much more than its interests in Central Asia, and I would say the same goes for Beijing. Beijing, although it seems like Beijing got Moscow just because Moscow acted the way it's acted and blocked all of the other alternatives rather than becoming more dependent on China. China still values its relationship with Russia for China's own national security and future inevitable, in Beijing's view, competition with or even confrontation with the US. Russia is a very important asset, and that is why I think for the time being, Central Asia will be put aside in this relationship. But in this time being, we see growing cooperation. It's both on the official level. We see Beijing and Moscow signing joint statements where they clearly say that they cooperate in Central Asia for questions like preventing color revolutions and stuff like that. And we also see some cooperation on the ground. And I think one important take that I should outline here is that although Moscow sees how China is becoming more dynamic, more active, more present in the region, even in the sensitive security sphere, Russia still has one role that no one else can take over, and this is the regime security guarantor. No one else has the same level of understanding. No one else has the same level of trust. No one else has the same, language skills that Russia shares with Central Asian countries, because we still have the set of political elites and set of the leaders in the region who perfectly speak Russian and perfectly share the same understanding of how world works. And all 5 Central Asian countries are friendly authoritarian regimes to the Russian one. And we've seen in January 2022 how Russia can become this savior for the regime stability. And until those days, till Russia has this tool to save, in case of emergency, the political regimes in Central Asia, I think we will not see a substantial decline of Russia's presence in the region.
Very interesting. I mean, you referred to the statement that was made when Xi made his visit to Moscow in March of last year, and they both signed a statement regarding their shared interest in Central Asia, an actual statement vowing to safeguard it from color revolutions and external interference in the affairs of the region. And one just can't help but wonder that this wasn't something that the Central Asians perhaps welcomed, given that it would make it much more difficult for them to balance one off against the other. But that's speculation. But I wanted to move to this idea of competing trade routes, because I think it's so important. It's something that Nargis has already alluded to twice. And Central Asia's strategic location between Russia and China certainly has implications for the development of alternative trade routes, including the Middle Corridor that bypasses Russia. I mean, if you think about it, more than 80% of all land transit traffic from China to Europe passes through Kazakhstan. And at the same time, Russia is clearly hoping to reorient its exports along a north-south axis, as well as to the east, with China playing a pivotal role here. So there are many competing trade corridors in play. And we've even, as you said, Nargi, something I think is particularly interesting and perhaps under the radar, we've seen Russia attempting to freeze Turkmenistan out of the Central Asian gas market by making claims on the Central Asian Chinese pipeline market in favor of its own exports. And now this really leaves Beijing as the final arbiter in many respects. So what I wanted to ask you is, do you think that, do you see China balancing its relations with the Central Asian states vis-a-vis relations with Russia? How do you see that working out? Is it, is it going to, do you think it's going to favor more the Central Asian position and its, their territorial sovereignty and integrity, or, how do you imagine that's going to work?
I think it's spot on, Annette. And for China, China wouldn't like the return of the dominance of Russia, in Central Asia, because it's much better for China to work with 5 small, friendly, to a considerable degree dependent states, than to have Russia all over. And of course, it's beneficial to to play that role of an arbiter and to have a choice, right? Not to be fully dependent on Russia for pipeline gas, and so and that's why, that's one of the reasons why China will be trying to balance these relations between Russia and Central Asian states. Yeah. And this rhetoric about color revolutions, I mean, color revolutions are not on the agenda in the region. So, you can say whatever you want, and there are some genuine interests, with the counterterrorism and all that. So, but overall, it is an interesting thing. And here our agency comes in, China is interested in Central Asian, maintaining and maybe strengthening Central Asian agency vis-a-vis Russia. But I would also put, since you started with the trade routes, and I think it's also very important to understand for understanding the dynamics, if relations with the West, right? The West is definitely part of the picture, yeah, and Russia and China have very different relations with the West. They both don't like U.S. hegemony and all that, but Russia has decoupled from the West, basically, right? While China wants to maintain ties, right? And that's why China would be, is ready to cooperate on the development of this middle corridor, which is part of this Belt and Road, initiative. This middle corridor thing, of course, it's Turkey's initiative. It's pushed by Turkey and and Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan, and the EU is now ready to sponsor it, to finance the projects along the middle corridor, and China is on board. That's something that for Russia, it is a competition on the one hand. On the other hand, that's a way to maintain the connections indirectly, with the Western markets, have access to Western technology, and so it's, once again, I'm repeating the word complicated, but it is a very complicated setting.
Timur, can you uncomplicate it for us a bit, or are you also finding it very complicated?
I am rather skeptical about, many new initiatives that right now are being discussed a lot, like the middle corridor or any other route that goes beyond Russian territory, if anything would not, any huge escalation would not happen on the front lines of the war in Ukraine. Because for now it seems like even under current circumstances, the biggest chunk of the trade from from China to Europe is going still through the Russian territory, and it's very as Nargis said, complicated process to divert those routes. It's not going to take a year or two. It's going to take much more than that. And the biggest question here is who's going to pay for developing, if we speak about the middle corridor, who's going to invest into development of the infrastructure of the countries that are there, of the countries of South Caucasus, of the countries of Central Asia, of and also the Caspian Sea is too small to take in so much of the trade routes that are right now working through Russia. But even with that, it's sometimes even easier for China to trade through water, through sea, rather than relying on railways if there will be a situation of complete blockage on the Russian side. So I am very skeptical about the new trade routes. Of course, we will see increase of the trade through them, but it will not be substantial to the level that it will completely kind of get Russian territory out of the picture.
Right. Nargis, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah. I'll do my favorite thing. I'll agree and disagree with Timur. Because on the one hand, I agree that the middle corridor is not a substitute for the northern corridor, or it's not a substitute for the maritime routes, but I think it is a serious serious project, and with many serious people on board. And I mentioned that the EU is ready to finance some projects, and there was an investment forum in Brussels, and the EU institutions and international financial institutions allocated 10 billion euro for various projects, and World Bank is doing studies, and so you have kind of people with money, right? Institutions with money who are ready to support, and also very importantly, the countries along the route are pushing as well. Azerbaijan is a serious player, Kazakhstan also has resources and kind of the need. That's very important. The incentive, the motivation is strong. And here I want to flag the World Bank report on the middle corridor that was published. They foresee a dramatic increase in the cargo along the middle corridor, but it will be primarily not so much Europe, China, but it will be more between the regions along the route. And I think it's very, very important. It can be a game changer. I think it is a game changer for connecting Central Asia, South Caucasus, Turkey, Europe. Not a substitute, but I think we can look at it as a game changer.
Okay. Right. Well, there's a lot to say about the middle corridor, but if we carry on with that, we won't get to any of these questions. And I'd like to start with a question by Catherine Poots, and she asks, how has the war in Ukraine affected the state of affairs between Russia and Central Asia? Well, we've alighted on that, touched that somewhat. But when she asks, do you think Russia's isolation has increased its need to keep Central Asia on side? And if so, does this provide Central Asian states more leverage? And do you see that leverage being used? So rather than discussing the leverage held by Moscow and Beijing, what do you see as Central Asian leverage? So I think that's a really interesting question. Who would like to take it? Perhaps Timur?
Yeah. Hi, Kathy. First of all, thank you for the great question. I think every single sphere of dependency can be turned upside down and discussed as the leverage that Central Asian countries have over Russia. We tend to speak, for example, about migration as something that Central Asia needs more than Russia, but in reality, it's a double-edged sword. Both Russia and Central Asian countries need migration because Central Asian countries don't have enough jobs and cannot provide their growing populations with the enough working places and with the enough salaries. Russia needs those people because of its demographic crisis, which has been accelerated by the war in Ukraine. So this is one of the leverages that Central Asian countries have, especially right now when it comes to the question of re-export access to some of the products that are no longer available on the Russian market. Here, Central Asia also comes as a important partner that opens a little bit this window to the unsanctioned world for Russia. I'm not necessarily speaking about the dual-use products or technologies, although there are examples of these kinds of products getting into Russia through Central Asia, but mostly I'm talking about civil products, just different brands that left Russia and no longer officially available on the Russian market. And most importantly, I think Central Asian countries have a role of those countries that didn't turn their backs on Russia in the times where Russia is so much isolated and is so toxic, and this is something that in a way Russia doesn't value enough, and we've seen how Russia reacts to the Crocus City terror attack, and how it doesn't really care about relationship with the closest allies that it has right now around the world.
Great, thank you. And here's a question that's quite interesting, a bit of a twist. So Timur Gursakev asks, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Russia have agreed to develop a transport corridor bypassing the territory of Kazakhstan. Quite unusual, most everything goes through Kazakhstan. So what is behind this initiative, he asks? Is this path beneficial for Europe and the United States, given that international financial institutions are preparing to provide loans to Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan for the development of their transport infrastructure? How strongly does China support this initiative? Nordigiz, can you take a stab at that?
Well, I'm not a big expert on transport, to be honest, but it seems there is a competition underway, and there is nothing wrong with that, and well, Kazakhstan could consolidate its position and this main transit hub, and has been investing in it for a long time. Now, Uzbekistan wants to be more connected, yeah, but they are kind of latecomers to the game, and there is some kind of soft competition between Russia and Kazakhstan in this regard. So, but it's okay, These are the circumstances. It's not like something that Kazakhstan should prevent and and see it as a hostile act, I guess. So, well, it's competition, and that's okay. I think that there is a competition. I think we need to what we need to do, Central Asians, is to work better together and coordinate more to strengthen the region at large, and that requires certain compromises, with each other. So, taking a more strategic approach, I think, is something that we would need in these very difficult circumstances.
Timur, do you have anything that you would like to add to that particular question?
Oh, I would just say that this particular project that we're speaking about, China, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan Railway, was on the table for as long as I myself remember more than 20 years. So it's not this is a project that all three countries are speaking about constantly, but here I should
referring to a different project here. Excuse me, this is not.
Oh, sorry, it's not
That's the thing. This is not the Chinese Kyrgyzstan Uzbekistan railway that has yet to materialize. This is a project Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Russia have agreed to
Oh,
develop.
Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Russia. Sorry, I didn't catch it. Okay. Railway, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Russia. I don't think that Russia is ready to invest in Central Asia's infrastructure at the moment, considering that it's spending a lot on the front line. So I would be very skeptical about any project that Russia is talking about these days.
Yeah, makes sense. And
But it's not Turkmenistan?
no, I mean,
No, but how do you connect to Russia? Sorry, without. It's
Yeah,
either
without
through
Kazakhstan.
Kazakhstan but because I think there is a route like Turkmenistan by sea, and
By
then you
sea.
go through Turkmenistan, because I mean, otherwise, how do you connect with Russia?
yeah, yes, indeed, a very good geographical point.
But there is something, yeah. There are these plans to
I mean,
develop.
of course, they exist.
Heavy
The
corridor.
Soviet railways in all Central Asian countries, and Russia is connected through railway to both Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan through Kazakhstan.
Right?
Through Kazakhstan,
No,
of
here
course.
I think
Yes.
it's something across the Caspian, from what I know.
Okay. I don't know.
I think we'd have to have a little bit more information on that particular project. But Nargiz, you mentioned cooperation within the region, and we have a question here from Craig Roberton. What are the prospects for eventual political integration among the Central Asian states, and how would Moscow and Beijing respond? I mean, it's a good question. Has the war pushed them closer together or not?
Yes, it has. And but there was already good dynamics prior to the war. And I would link it to the annexation of Crimea, actually, and Russia being under sanctions. And and that's when late Karima, opened up, and kind of, and Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan cooperation kind of got an upgrade. And then you had Mirziyoyev, who opened up, and kind of Mirziyoyev was such good news for regional cooperation. And now there are these regular consultative meetings. There are kind of all these new agreements, and some practical projects, which is a good thing. But political union of any kind is not on the agenda. And well, we had an attempt in the mid 90s to create, Central Asian Union, and then Russia kind of entered and then basically destroyed the thing, right? So I don't think it's feasible. I think there will be softer ways of cooperation. I think something like an association, something along the lines of the ASEAN, is more likely. Personally, I'm in big favor of having something more solid, But even having something like ASEAN is like, okay, that's our North Star at the moment. But I think we can do it, and I think we kind of, the region is moving in this direction. But Russia, on the one hand, it incentivizes this trend. On the other, it has a lot of capacity to sabotage it. So.
Right, that makes perfect sense. I'm going to turn to a question from Katya Glod, and I'm going to direct it to Timur in light of your work that you did on Uzbekistan and China for the OSCE. And she asks, what kind of leverage does the West, the US and the EU, have in Central Asia? Are they at all able to persuade Central Asian states not to re-export sanctioned goods to Russia? And a separate question, how does Uzbekistan position itself between the West, Russia, and China? And I know that this is a little bit controversial in the sense that I think Timur, a colleague of yours, Nathaniel Sher, has actually written recently to say that really these parallel imports from China are not even going through the Central Asian region. But of course, that doesn't mean that they're not coming from other countries. So, the question still stands. So I don't know, it's a two-parter, whichever part you want to go for first.
Yes, thank you for the great question. I think that the West has some leverage over Central Asian countries. First of all, it is, we shouldn't forget that all five Central Asian countries are portraying themselves as constitutional democracies, and this has not happened for no reason. It happened because right now in the modern world, if you want to be a part of a global economic system, global international organizations, you have to pretend that you're a democracy, as well as other countries that are driving this global processes, even if we are living in a times where it's not very obvious, but it still is an important part of the picture. And that is why it is important for Central Asian countries to be welcomed by the Western states, and it is in a way the presence of the West and the connections that the West has with Central Asian countries limits the amount of repression, the amount of double down on the control over the society and all other problems with human rights that we observe in Central Asia. Although we should say that it's the relationship with the West doesn't stop Central Asian political regimes from doing what they're doing, but it certainly limits, and this is certainly a factor that they consider when taking certain actions in this direction. Other than that, the West has tangible leverage over Central Asian countries. It's collectively, if you speak about the European Union, is 1/3 of the trade of Central Asian countries, is the biggest investor. And I think those two already make up a very important partner, and especially right now when the West is trying to speak about the resilience of Central Asian countries. I think the leverage in a way grows, but with this leverage, the dilemma also becomes more pressing for the European countries. The dilemma between cooperating with Central Asian countries and being more pragmatic, and on the other hand, you have still all of those problems with domestic politics in Central Asia and vis-a-vis relationship with Russia and China that the West kind of cannot close its eye on. And one of these questions is, of course, the re-export that is happening through Central Asian countries. And here, Europe, for example, cannot simply come and put officially and publicly put pressure on Central Asian countries, because in the eyes of European capitals, it will mean that it will further alienate Central Asian countries from the West, and Central Asians will get even closer to Russia and China. And that is why I think the West's position here is to have those consultations and discussions behind closed door, not to make a fuss out of it, not to bring it up loudly, because this approach will not work.
Right. Well, I mean, of course, then you had meetings between Tokayev and Olaf Scholz, who came away very satisfied, absolutely convinced that Kazakhstan was going to crack down on this, and then the next day you simply had the export controls being ignored. So one wonders how effective these meetings are. Yeah, Nargiz.
I think I would somewhat disagree. I think Kazakh government is genuinely trying, but there's a considerable challenge. We are part of the Eurasian Economic Union, and there is no kind of customs border, right? So, but if you look at the measures and I think there is genuine effort. It might be patchy in places, but I would disagree that he lied, kind of in the face. And I think Kazakhstan doesn't want secondary sanctions,
Oh, yeah.
genuinely doesn't want secondary sanctions, and genuinely is concerned because Europe is our main trade partner, right?
Mhm.
So if we lose Europe, that's it, So but can I say a couple of
Of
words
course, sure.
on the leverage of the West? The West has leverage. Yes, it's kind of limited, but it has leverage because Central Asia needs the West. It with the collapse of the Soviet Union, it received this historic opportunity to emerge from under the shadow of Russia. And if you take historically Russia and China, and you don't want to be like kind of just with these two, okay?
Mhm.
And that's why it's vital to keep the connections. And I think now with the war, it's even kind of more so. And the concern is that there will be decoupling. And here I think there is a difference that I started to talk about. Like Russia decoupled, China doesn't want to decouple, and for China, Central Asia is a connector to Europe, right? So we are kind of playing different games here, and the concern is that there will be more decoupling between China and the West, and then we'll find ourselves in a very difficult situation. But I think for what you started talking about, how do you work with the kind of how do Europeans work with the Central Asians, and they are countries that are not liberal, but countries that are interested in the liberal world order,
Mhm.
if I
Mhm.
can put it this way. So they want to have sovereignty, they want to have international law, but these are not liberal systems as
Yeah.
of now, right?
Mhm.
So, and we are not the only ones like that. Yeah, kind of international law abiding invested countries, and it's important to to kind of find a way of working with these countries, right? And with these whole regions that are like that. So and I'm glad there is less now on the kind of democracy versus autocracy,
Well,
because that's not what I think the West should be investing in. The West should be investing in maintaining that uh, for the kind of for the lack of a better word, the liberal world order.
yeah, much less democracy promotion. We're running out of time, but I did want to make sure to get to this final question. It's an interesting one. I'll direct it to Timur, by Samuel Mills, the ever-present civilizational question, as I call it, where he writes, there seems to be a piece of popular wisdom that states that Russia has the soft power resources in Central Asia, language, shared history, people links, but China does not. Indeed, there does seem to be fairly significant fear of China in many quarters of Central Asian society. So do you see China investing significant resources in trying to change this? And if so, is it working?
Yes, China is investing into its soft power mechanisms and its soft power overall presence in the region. We see it through various mechanisms, such as, I mean, everybody's thinking about Confucius Institutes when it comes to soft power, but it's not limited to only that. We're speaking about partnerships between the universities, between even schools, speaking about investment into different education programs through tech corporations of China, promotion of Chinese TV shows on local state affiliated TVs, and many other things like cooperation between the media, etc., etc. But the nature of soft power, in my view, doesn't work like that. It doesn't work. There is no clear correlation between the money you spend on soft power and the result that you get. Even if China invests heavily in its soft power promotion, it will not 100% will be will be seen as a great country automatically. Central Asian people still do not listen to Chinese music. Central Asian people still watch much more Korean, Turkish TV shows, even with the huge promotion from the state level of the Chinese cinematography. Central Asian people do not know any popular Chinese poets or writers, whereas they know much more, much better the famous poets of their own culture, of course, and the culture of their neighbors or Russian ones, or global ones, right? So it doesn't work like that. And in my view, the problem of China's soft power is not so much in the PR of it, but rather in the limits that it has inside, the limits that China's culture has inside Chinese political regime, because only in open societies culture can prosper and become a magnet that drives attention globally, as it happening with globalization and other countries that became a great example of it. And China, I would say, is not a good example of soft power, not only in Central Asia, but globally.
Interesting, an answer that really made me think, at least. So thank you for that. Well, we've come to the end of the session, and apologies to those who have asked questions that I just won't be able to get to. I hope you all agree that it's been a lively and interesting discussion, and really my sincere thanks go to both Nargis and Timur for your time and contributions, and also thank you to our audience, of course, for your questions. A final reminder that this session has been recorded, so you can catch up on Chatham House's YouTube channel if you've missed anything. Sincere thanks again to our panelists and audience, and until we meet again.